Hello, my name is Cade Byron and I am a professional visual development artist, having worked on such projects as Velma and the upcoming Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse. You might know me for my love of graphic shapes, cityscapes, and monsters. Or for my love of the penguins of Madagascar. Probably from that. Today, I thought I would share how I go about doing a study. The first and hardest step is figuring out what to paint. I use Pinterest to find references, but honestly, you can get stuck looking for the perfect image for hours on end here. I certainly have. Eventually, I stumbled on this shot of Walt from the movie Paris, Texas, and thought it would be perfect to paint. I love the high contrast between the warms and the cools and the wide value range. So I opened up Photoshop and started painting. I don't have the first part of the recording, but basically what I am doing is dividing everything into two tones, what is in light and what is in dark. I'm going into the subject and looking for shapes of light and shapes of dark. I am not worrying about transitions at this point, instead I am designing the forms of light and dark. I think it's really easy to overwhelm yourself at this stage and worry about midtones and transitions, and that leads to a muddy image. Instead, by keeping it to two tones, you are focusing on making the image as readable as possible. Now, I'm adding a third tone, the lightest light, which you're seeing on the paper, the cup, and his forehead. And then a fourth tone, in this case the average shadow. The darkest darks are on their own layer, so I can use a clipping mask to paint on top of them, again looking for ways to define the form. Now I'm adding some softer edges. Even if you don't have a super graphic style, I think it's really important to get these main shapes down first before you worry about transitions. I was a little looser with the shapes than I normally am, so I'm really just trying to clarify all the forms at this stage. And now I'm doing the same treatment to the background. I was pretty unhappy with how Walt looked, so using the same method I went in and just polished all the edges. Unfortunately, I don't have a recording of that. Anyways, once you have these tones figured out, you can move on to color. Color used to always be the hardest part for me, getting all the hues and saturations right. However, by making sure your tones are down pat, you have a lot more freedom to play with the color. I'm using a hard light mode to guesstimate the colors, and then using hue and saturation sliders to push and pull them. You can use a color overlay, but I found that leads to flat and dead looking colors. By using hard light and keeping your value somewhere in the middle, this layer will have an influence on the tones while still keeping the correct value separation. There's probably an exact science to guessing colors, but really what I'm doing is keeping everything in either warm or cool tones, something made very easy by the reference. In the same way, it is important to separate your darks. By separating your warms and cools, it allows for more freedom to not get the hues exactly right. Truthfully, if your values are down pat, you can really use any color and the image will be readable, but I'm a bit too timid to push it that far. Now I'm using a softer brush to play with edges, to make it look less graphic. For whatever reason, my screen recording didn't capture the hue saturation sliders, but I'm pressing Ctrl U and then pushing and pulling the hue and saturation. Another important tool is to convert your image back to grayscale, so you can make sure that your tones are still as readable as they were before. Now we're in the home stretch. I figured out the broad colors for everything, and I'm just going in and adding all the little details. This phase is the most fun to me, but in some ways it's also the hardest, because you don't ever know when you're done. You can keep detailing and rendering everything for hours, and if this was a piece for Spider-Verse, that's what I would be doing. However, this is supposed to just be a quick study, and therefore you gotta know when to call it quits. Now I'm painting directly on top of the image. This phase is really fun, and you can keep doing this for a long time, but again, you have to think about what your goal is with the piece. My focus was going from tones to colors, so a polished render isn't necessarily what I'm after. So just getting those important details to make it as readable of a study as possible. Now adding some pink and teal highlights. Why I do this, I don't know. I think they're neat. Just finalizing and checking the tones, and I think we're done. So, in the end, what matters most is tones. You don't have to worry about color picking or getting those exact colors right. Instead, by breaking your image down into a simple value structure, coloring the image becomes quick and easy. I hope this was useful, and I hope to see you all again in the future.